The year was 1647. The first phase of the English Civil War was over, and Parliament believed they had achieved victory. King Charles I was imprisoned within Carisbrooke Castle, and military resistance had effectively ended. But heavy taxation and the extreme prejudice with which the new model army put down any resistance saw much of England and Scotland seething with unrest. This unrest boiled over into full-blown rioting when, in December, Parliament decreed that the celebration of Christmas was to be banned. They called the celebration a pagan superstition and would brook no special treatment of the day. The Mayor of Canterbury, Michael Page, read a proclamation in the streets that no shops were to be closed, no herbs hung in windows, and no plum broth to be prepared. Christmas fell upon a Saturday that year, and he also declared that the market was to be held as normal. But in spite of his strict orders, with their parliamentary backing, many still gathered in St. Andrew's Church on the High Street. Parliament had made a great effort to curtail the power of the Church of England throughout the war, but it still held a great deal of popular influence. Some, quote, new saints formed a vocal mob outside the church in an attempt to drown out the sermon being held, but further protesters arrived to challenge them. Mayor Page was frustrated by the absence of the market and attempted to persuade shop owners to open their stores. After one refusal too many, he resorted to striking a man for his defiance. This was all the incentive needed for Canterbury to explode. The mayor was thrown into an open sewer and another man was killed in the ensuing violence. The riots lasted 3 days and threw the entire county of Kent into uproar. The riots were eventually contained by the efforts of the leading gentry of Canterbury, most prominently the alderman, Mr. Avery Sabine, Sir William Mann, and the future governor of New York, Francis Lovelace. In January of 1948, Parliament responded, at the frantic request of Michael Page, and Colonel Hewson's regiment of foot was dispatched to the city to arrest the ringleaders. They promptly imprisoned Sabine, Mann, and Lovelace, along with several other nobles. They spent 2 months starving under parliamentary guard. After their release, however, Mr. Page again demanded their standing trial by oye and termine. A grand jury was assembled of men of supposed loyalty to Parliament, and the judges were specially selected for their ruthless zeal. The jury were ordered to reach a certain verdict, but Parliament were in for a rude shock, however, when instead the jury found a verdict of ignoramus. Sabine, Mann, and Lovelace, they said, could not be found guilty of treason, as the jury did not know whether they were or not. Incensed, the judges demanded the jury confer again, and again they declared ignoramus. The judges refused to acquit the defendants without Parliament's personal thoughts, but they were interrupted with news of the great parliamentary victory over royalist rebels at St. Fagans in Wales. This led to a further round of disputes, but the jury refused to be swayed, and the defendants were eventually released. The jury was so infuriated by the conduct of the judges in attempting to coerce them that they formed a petition to Parliament, requesting that the king be released to open a dialogue on the governance of the country. They also demanded the disbandment of the new model army. This petition was spread throughout the land, with a note that all copies were to be collated in Rochester on the 29th of May. Parliament was rather alarmed by this, and issued a notice of anti-protest to be read in every church on the 21st of May, and armies were sent into Kent to crush any signs of protest. The men of Kent responded by forming up into their own armies, which were greatly bolstered by surviving cavaliers from across England. The rebellion gained momentum. A second petition was created in Surrey and actually taken to London, but as the band from Surrey did not wait to join the forces from Kent, they were annihilated. Their deaths were not entirely in vain, however, as the county of Essex rose up in sympathy. Such was Parliament's alarm that Sir Thomas Fairfax was dispatched to Kent at the head of a large army. This decorated leader had already distinguished himself at the battles of Marston Moor and Naseby, and was described by King Charles as brutish. Fairfax wisely avoided attacking the royalists in Rochester, instead striking at a smaller force in Maidstone. The forces at Maidstone fought bravely for several hours, but were ultimately overwhelmed. The Royalist forces in Rochester were struck by indecision, ultimately leaving the rebels of Maidstone to their fate. The Royalist forces began to disperse, with many making their way to Colchester in Essex. These forces were bolstered by more rioters and seasoned Royalist soldiers. They looted the county magazine and occupied the city. Fairfax arrived and immediately launched a full-scale assault. This was repulsed after bloody fighting and resulted in an 11-week siege that only ended when the defenders heard of the defeat of the Royalists at Preston. The surrender effectively marked the end of this part of the rebellion, and the petition never reached Parliament.